For years, Kaliningrad was Putin's iron fist aimed at Europe. Today, it's the Kremlin's most vulnerable wound, and the West is squeezing it. Poland and Lithuania have accelerated their operation to strangle Kaliningrad. Roads are closed, railways are blocked. The sea route is now at risk of being cut off with a snap decision. This diplomatic strangulation reached its peak with a threat from Warsaw that amounts to an open declaration of war. On December 11th, a Polish general declared, "If we are forced to, we will burn everything within 300 kilometers." That icy challenge hit Putin like a slap in the face, and it's turning Kaliningrad from a threat into a defenseless hostage. Let's start with the exodus. The people of Kaliningrad know the end is coming, and they're not waiting for the Kremlin. According to sociological studies, at least 1 in 5 adults in the region has a family member who has left through migration. Official Rosstat data doesn't show the net population loss. Migration inflows partially offset outflows. But independent surveys and academic studies tell a different story. Taking into account estimates and suspicions of data manipulation, it's thought that between 50,000 and 150,000 people may have emigrated or permanently left the oblast between 2022 and 2025. The Kremlin is concealing the data, and the profile of this exodus is devastating. The people leaving are highly educated young professionals from IT and industrial sectors, the segment Russia needs most. Poland, Lithuania, and Germany are the most attractive destinations. For those who remain, the situation is even more desperate. According to rbc.ru, unemployment has increased by an astonishing 21.7% since the beginning of the year. Before the invasion of Ukraine, life in Kaliningrad was different from the rest of Russia. People lived closer to Western European norms. Logistics flowed smoothly. Trucks moved without getting stuck at borders. Trains ran freely. For locals, Lithuania wasn't just a neighboring country. It was a source of affordable groceries, better healthcare, and a window to the West. But after the invasion, EU and NATO sanctions, plus Lithuania's transit restrictions, plunged Kaliningrad into a logistical shock unprecedented since the Soviet Union's collapse. This severed Kaliningrad's vital arteries, triggering a domino effect. First, the roads went. Then, the railways halted. Moscow's response was loud and theatrical. Threats, condemnations, warnings. But this revealed a deeper truth. Russia had built a system dependent on corridors it couldn't control. Moscow's only hope? Supply routes by sea. Shipments from St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad ports, but this promise collided with harsh geopolitical reality. Shipping costs skyrocketed. Delivery times doubled. Ferry queues grew longer due to a shortage of ships. Some truck drivers reported waiting at ports for over 2 months. Factories faced material shortages because depend on European components. Major automotive and motorcycle manufacturers in the region, Avtotor and Volt Motors, halted operations overnight. Nearly half of the vehicles belonging to over 1,000 transport companies now sit idle due to cargo shortage. This directly affects 15,000 to 18,000 workers. This is industrial collapse. What makes this even more critical is the geopolitical reshaping of the Baltic Sea itself. With Finland and Sweden joining NATO, the Baltic Sea has effectively become a NATO lake. Kaliningrad has become a structurally vulnerable military outpost, surrounded on all sides by NATO members. Lithuania has explicitly stated the possibility of halting transit to ensure security. Combined with military threats from Poland, this means even the sea route could be shut down immediately. And that brings us to the Polish general's warning. Jarosław Gromodzynski, former commander of the European Corps, sent Russia a clear signal. "We can go there, and you should take that into account." He went even further. "If we are forced to, we will burn everything within 300 kilometers, and set fire to everything within 900 kilometers. This wasn't hyperbole. This was a threat assessment, and it's backed by action. The German army has begun deploying to areas near the Kaliningrad border as part of Poland's Eastern Shield operation. German soldiers are digging trenches, laying barbed wire, erecting anti-tank barriers. This is concrete proof that the area is a potential battlefield. Russian military planners are aware of this. Secretly, they acknowledge that in any major conflict with NATO, Kaliningrad would be cut off within days and soon become militarily insignificant. Airports and missile facilities could cause damage in the first hours, but none would survive a prolonged conflict. Geography is unforgiving. An outlying region can demonstrate strength, but it cannot sustain it. And Russia has already been forced to withdraw military units from the region. 2 reasons. First, to support its army in Ukraine, whose resources are being depleted. Second, to establish new units along the Finnish border following Finland's NATO accession. This shows Kaliningrad is no longer a military priority. It's a sign of Moscow's weakness, forced to stretch resources across expanding fronts. Sources: ISW, Jamestown Foundation, Defense Intelligence. But the strangest and perhaps most devastating change didn't occur in economic indicators or military activities. It occurred in the spirit of the city. The Kremlin began to fear that this strategic piece of Baltic coastline, geographically within Europe, would also drift there mentally. For Moscow, Kaliningrad was no longer just an outpost. It was a potential hotbed of treason. The Kremlin strikes with an iron fist the moment it detects any hint of separatism. Kaliningrad was subjected to a more intense intelligence blockade than the rest of Russia. Authorities began presenting public discontent not as rational reaction to economic hardship, but as a game played by Polish or German intelligence. A Kaliningrad resident asking, "Why is cement so expensive?" was instantly labeled part of the West's destabilization operation. A denunciation mechanism reminiscent of the Soviet era was put in place. Neighbors accused each other of pro-Western talk. Local media was completely silenced. Kremlin propaganda portrayed Kaliningrad as a heroic Russian fortress in the middle of the NATO Sea. More S-400 batteries, more Iskander missiles, more military exercises. Moscow believed arming the region would make people feel safe. But the reality for Kaliningrad's people was different. The local population didn't see Poles or Lithuanians as enemies. They were neighbors they visited for weekend shopping. The people's real fear wasn't a NATO attack. It was Moscow using them. The people of Kaliningrad realized they were pawns in Moscow's grand geopolitical game, placed on the table without their consent. The Kremlin used the region to threaten Europe, but it was Kaliningrad's people paying the price. The most ironic and tragic aspect? Moscow exerted so much pressure to prevent separatism that it actually created resentment that didn't exist. People grew cold toward the motherland, not because of Europe's influence, but because of Moscow's indifference and pressure. People began to think, it's not Polish intelligence provoking us. It's the bills you send and the locks on the border gates. The more the Kremlin tightened its grip, the more it lost the people emotionally. Kaliningrad's current crisis is not only a result of current geopolitics, but also the scene of a deep historical drama. When these lands were conquered by the Red Army in 1945, Königsberg, home of Immanuel Kant and centuries of German identity, effectively disappeared. This cultural erasure turned the region into an artificial Soviet border province, unable to establish organic connection with its past. Today, Kaliningrad is suspended between two worlds, geographically European, politically Russian, historically caught between German and Soviet identities. If Russia weakens due to the Ukraine war and sanctions, the region's future is plunged into complete uncertainty. As Moscow's subsidies and military support diminish, the local population, especially the young, Europeanized segment, is likely to begin questioning why their region should remain tied to a mainland, sliding toward isolation and authoritarian collapse. Sources: Historical Context, The Guardian, Jamestown Foundation. So here's where we are. Kaliningrad is the point where Putin's ambitions collide most crushingly with reality. Economic hardship, military vacuum, silent panic and flight of the population. These definitively prove that the West's strategy to strangle this isolated stronghold is working. Europe's last imperial outpost is now on the verge of collapse. Once seen as an impregnable stronghold, this outlying region has become a trapped military orphanage under logistical suffocation and NATO's military pressure. This crisis proclaims to the world that the Kremlin's Baltic security is gone, and that the price of war is being paid by the most European Russians. What do you think? Is Kaliningrad's collapse inevitable? Or can Moscow still save this strategic outpost? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe, hit the bell, because Kaliningrad is the canary in the coal mine for Russia's future. This is Global Power Report. We watch the collapse so you can prepare for what's next.